Oh.
Kind of leave that.
Yeah, I think.
And then 2 online, 3 online.
That's it. Yeah. Got everybody. Yeah. All right, and we're at 3. I'll go ahead and if we're all ready, pull up the. All right. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is our June 27th meeting of the JMRL Regional Library Board. This hybrid meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance with Albemarle County's, thank you, Ordinance number 20-A16, an ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. If everybody present has had an opportunity to review our minutes from the last meeting, would anyone like to offer any changes or a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion.
A motion to approve? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all very much. The motion will carry. Okay, wonderful. Note the caps. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our announcements and public comments. David, I know you have a couple of announcements, but if you don't mind, I'll make one quickly to the group here. Thank you all very much for coming out today. Appreciate you all being here. And if this is your first opportunity to engage with the local library board, thank you so much. To those of you for whom this may be your first meeting, I'd like to just say a few things about our typical procedure that I hope might also clarify some misconceptions that I think have been out there about actions we took last month and what's on our agenda for the meeting this month. Our normal procedure is that items of new business, such as a discussion of the library name change, which we agreed to last month, move on for a report, discussion, and question. That's what we expect to do here today. After we have that opportunity to ask questions, items roll over to old business the following month, where we get a second report from our director, questions are answered. It allows us further discussion and if need be, the time for further questions. We'll repeat that process until the board feels like they are informed enough to make a decision and take a vote. So I don't expect that we will have a vote on the issue of the library's name change today. In fact, the board would be able to call a public hearing if need be to collect further feedback and commentary on that issue. So we have made a little extra space in our time for public comment here today, and we've put a sign-up sheet for speakers at the podium. We'll try to get through as many people as we can. Our normal policy is that speakers are given 5 minutes, and trustees will not respond directly to questions or comments that are made during public comment. If we can't get to everybody who is signed up today, please be assured that we will have further opportunities for comments. You can either submit them in writing after this meeting, and they'll be included in our minutes for the meeting that we will review and adopt, as you just saw us do next month. And again, we'll have, I would expect this on our agenda next month, and the opportunity perhaps even for a public hearing devoted to collecting feedback on this issue. So if you don't get an opportunity to speak today and would like to, please be assured we will make as much opportunity as we can for people to be heard. So thank you all very much.
Where's the list?
I've got it here. Sorry, we collected that at the beginning. If you'd like to add your name to it.
No.
Not at all.
Just a couple, make sure everybody had the chance to sign up.
Yes, did everybody get a chance? If you'd like, please come on up. We've got it here. I'll keep it there for a minute longer. As I said,
How long are you going to have the session?
we've got 30 minutes today for it. We might not get to everybody, but submit it in writing if you'd like, or we'll have other opportunities at future meetings.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, I think that about covers my, yes, please. announcements that I had. David, you had a few that you'd like to make as well.
Yeah, just one announcement really, which is that Lisa Wolfork has been reappointed for another 4 years to the library board. Last city of Charlottesville. Thank you for your service, Lisa.
All right, thank you, David. Okay, we will move on then to our public comment here. All right, go ahead, sign up.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine, you're fine. And then I'll get to the first name on the list. And if our first speaker would come up to the podium, you'll have 5 minutes. And I will do my best to let you know when that time is up if we need to. We do have a wait list here that looks like I would expect it to go beyond the half hour that we have.
May I make?
Yes, please.
Suggestion? I don't know if five minutes might be a lot, unless I would love to hear as many as people as we could possibly hear from. So I don't know if we need to decide to, instead of doing 5 minutes for everyone, we do 3. I just want to make sure we get everybody that's here gets a chance to speak.
Sure.
And people always go over. So I don't know.
I'd like to comment also, we do have a pre-existing policy and the 5 minutes is part of the policy. I'd like to always stick to what we said we would do in all cases. I don't believe that policy allows for a cutoff at 30 minutes. So Lisa, I would rather see us extend that 30 minutes. I'm in agreement with you that if someone has taken the time here to address us, I'm going to listen. And that's might be asking a lot from us, but I'm in favor of doing that, especially if our policy requires that. So I think we should review that policy quickly to see if there's any basis for a possible cutoff.
David, you've got that, I believe, if you'd like to pull it up. I am trying to be respectful of your time as volunteers and the time of our staff, but if you all agree that we'd like to spend the time going through these all here today, I think that that is fine. And Lisa, yes, I think the 5 minutes, we'll just ask people, please be as concise as possible. You have the 5 minutes available to you, but given the number of speakers that we have and the other items that we do need to get to our agenda today, please be as concise and efficient as we can be here. So we'll move along. Nicholas Cabrera, it looks like, is our first.
So can I make a comment?
Oh, yes.
That is the one person who pre-registered online.
Oh, yes.
Asking to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So I will ask if there is, could you repeat the name?
Nicholas Cabrera, it looks like.
Yes, Nicholas Cabrera. Okay, Nicholas, you can start your public comment.
Okay, thank you all so much for letting me speak. I'm sorry, I'm like out of breath. I just ran to my computer to be able to make this meeting. So my name is Nick Cabrera. I'm a rising senior at the University of Virginia and president of the Young Americans for Freedom at UVA. And I speak on Zoom today to you all. I wish I could be in person, but I'm in the state of Wyoming doing some summer research. I speak to you all today firmly against the name change of Jefferson Madison Regional Library. We lose our future when we burn our past. What you all are considering today is a direct burning of our past. Why is this discussion happening? On what basis? I recently went on to the JMRL online catalog. Upon searching Thomas Jefferson, 655 items were found, and for James Madison, 170. I encourage each and every one of you today to pick up one of these books and read them. Thomas Jefferson once said, whenever you do a thing, act as if all the world were watching. And to the board today, all the world is watching. If you vote to change the name of this library to fit your woke agenda, the world will not be impressed. We read books in high school about this, about the burning of books and erasing of our past through censorship and name changing. And over time, it has never turned out well. I am a member of the Charlottesville community, and I go to the university that Jefferson founded, and I pride myself on the freedom of this country. I know that you all may not value the writers of the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution like I do, but just imagine a world in which there were not these documents. Imagine what life might be like. But we might not know what life would have been like if those documents hadn't been written, because we'd be under British rule. Taking away the names of two of our founding fathers would be absolutely disgraceful to the freedom of opportunity this country provides and what they built. Without these freedom fighters, our freedoms may have never existed. And without Jefferson and Madison taking a leap of faith for a new vision of a new country, we would not be here today having this discussion. Let's honor their legacy, not erase it. And to the board, remember, that we lose our future when we burn our past. Vote not to burn. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Craig Decker.
And this was the second somebody sent this in electronically and asked me to read it into the public comment.
Thank you.
And I will time myself. Directors Plunkett, trustees, and fellow patrons. As a loyal patron and admirer of Jefferson and Madison, I rise in opposition to the possibility that our trustees might take away our cherished Jefferson-Madison Regional Library's name and the 50 years old right of patrons like me to enjoy our library visits and feel at home in part because of that name. It is ironic and a little sad, but perhaps fitting that this meeting is happening the same week that we Americans and Virginians come together to celebrate our independence and the founding fathers and mothers like Jefferson and Madison who fought for our freedoms when England tried to take away established rights without representation. I hope that our trustees consider this as our trustees consider this matter, they will do it in a careful, proper, fair, and above all democratic way. Careful because this will be a divisive issue that will further divide the Piedmont community, just as we're trying to heal and move on. Proper, and that there should be due process for Jefferson and Madison and patrons who support keeping their name. I assume the standard next step, if any, would be to send Ms. Anderson's demands to the appropriate committee to investigate and report back, not jump the gun as President Unsworth did in his premature comments in the Daily Progress. Fair, and that the trustees should be fair-minded and even-handed in going forward, having meetings with concerned patrons, listening sessions, and public hearings so all sides can be heard and aired. And most importantly, democratic. No nixation without representation. Ultimately, the will of the patrons and staff, one card, one vote of each local library should decide if they stay with the current JMRL system name or leave and change their name. And since we've had the name for 50 years, it should probably take some sort of supermajority to leave and change names. The silver lining in all this is that Jefferson and Madison can serve as models to their supporters as we move forward in this looming fight, first in the way they and other patriots oppose the tyranny of England and later the growing authoritarianism of the establishment federalists. We need to find one another and organize ourselves into email committees of correspondence and action, have bag lunches at our local branches, attend hearing and meet with elected officials and other fellow patrons outside our branches as we canvass and circulate petitions. Thanks and see you at the library. Craig Decker from Greene County.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Kent Schlusel.
That's close.
Thank you.
My name is Ken Slusher. I live in Albemarle County. I'm opposed to name change also. When you look at slavery several hundred years ago, there was an evil that existed in the culture of almost all countries. But when you review slavery, remember what it was about. Mostly Portuguese would go to Africa to pick up slaves that were captive by other tribes in Africa. These people, many of them were slaves to start off with. They would go to the Caribbean, cut sugarcane. And cutting sugarcane, as I've done, is really hard work, by the way. And then after a few years, they come to the American colonies, to places like Savannah, Annapolis, other places. Slavery was in all the colonies. But when we started to fight for our independence, we had two people that developed documents that gave the seed to free all people. Declaration of Independence and Constitution. These were documents that eventually led to the freedom of everybody. If it wasn't for these documents, we will not know where our future had been. So who wrote these documents? Jefferson, Madison, many other people. These people formed the idea that all men are created equal. It is those people that we should honor. Yes, they have the flaws. All of us have our flaws. None of us are perfect. We all have done things in our past that we're probably not too proud of. But if you look at the history of the Declaration of Independence, the arguments they had during that convention, and one of the biggest discussions was slavery. And it was Jefferson who pushed to free all people. And when the Constitution was developed about 10 years later, Madison was pushing for freedom of all people. Yes, they had slaves. It was economic things culturally accepted. Unfortunately, even today, slavery exists, particularly in Africa and Asia. It's an evil that we need to combat. But changing the library's name is ridiculous in the sense that here there are two people who fought for all people and planted the seed so that all people could be free. Do not change the name. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Jim Newman.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for allowing this to happen, and I urge you to give everyone a voice in the decision. I think all sides should be heard. Frankly, I'm opposed to changing the name. I frankly believe that it's really silly standing here defending Jefferson and Madison because they were a true treasure, and they should be treasured, and the library should be proud to have their names as part of their names. I would urge you to give as much time to comment to both sides. I would like to thank the Thomas for the Jefferson Council for the communications they've made to you. I would urge you to take them up on the debate basis. In any case, I would ask you not the name change. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Judy Sluisel. Corrected one, sorry.
Good afternoon. My name is Judy Flushel, and I am a resident here of Albemarle County and have lived here for over 40 years. During that time, when we've had visitors, we take them up to Monticello. We go up to Monticello. Our children visited Monticello. There are many rooms in that place that are very, very impressive. But one room in particular, people come away remembering the library. And ceiling to floor, Jefferson loved books. And it is quite apparent. Jefferson Madison Regional Library is it's a library. My suggestion is that we not change the name so that we remember Jefferson. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Gloria Beard. Gloria Beard. Thank you.
Well, my name is Gloria Beard, and I'm 72 years old. So I came up in the school of civil rights period. And I know about Jefferson because I've, learned about it a little bit in school. But it's time for a change for all people. And I hope y'all consider what we're trying to bring across to you. It's time to change so all people feel that this community, this world is for everybody.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Levon. I'm sorry, a little leadful on the last name. What is it?
Jans.
Jans. Thank you very much, Levon Jans.
Yeah, I just like to say my son, JMRL, do the right thing now. And it's about time for change. Yeah, I haven't lived in, I've been here now, I guess about 30 years or more. And I've noticed, all the name changes that have been happening. And I just think that with the 2017, there was a lot of subtle racism that I experienced since I've been here. But for the most part, I go to most of the libraries, mostly the Central Branch. And, people there that work there have been really nice and everything. But when it comes to the name change, I understand traditionally how people may want to keep it, but I also understand how people of color here have struggled with the Vinegar Hill and all those different things and what those names really stand for. So them as owning slaves. Other places have come and changed and got on board with the name change because they believe that, they wanted to be inclusive and be diverse, including everyone. So I just think that I think it's time to change the name from Jefferson Madison because of the history, not saying, you know, the good things that they tried to do, but just saying, that it represents an old time, a time of owning slaves. And I just think that, it's just time for change. It's 2022, and you should fall in line with the other places that tried to you know, look out for the people that come to the library. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Mclean, I believe it is.
Afternoon. Thank you again for having hearing, and I agree that we all need to hear from everyone. And I do want to talk about what Jefferson's name stands for and the importance of history. Without Jefferson, we would not have the freedoms we have. So that is just so important for people to research, come to libraries that are full of books. Yes, he loved books. He gave books for this library in 1823. So you're biting the hand that has fed you with, you know, his books started this library, and then Paul Goodloe McIntyre, his books too. So whatever else he did or didn't do, I can assure you, Jefferson will always be remembered as a man who wrote what could be the greatest government document ever in world history, certainly in American history, the Declaration of Independence. It's an accomplishment that exceeds the importance of the works of Shakespeare, the Magna Carta, the writings of Cicero. Without the principles set forth in the Declaration of Independence, we would have no rights and no liberties and be completely at the mercy of the government, which we do not want to be. That is not America. So the enemies of Jefferson may not realize it, but they would have no rights at all if his ideas are discarded and you take his name away. So you can look at regimes of Hitler and Stalin and now Putin, and you can say, thank goodness for Jefferson. And let's go take my children to the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library and learn all about different cultures and what they've done and who has been good and who has cared about others. So I think his ideas were actually divinely inspired by God, and we should remember that. And John F. Kennedy, in his inaugural address, reiterated the same themes with force and clarity. The rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Myra Anderson.
My name is Myra Anderson, and I'm the president of Reclaimed Roots Descendants Alliance. I am also a descendant of the enslaved families of Monticello and the enslaved laborers of the University of Virginia. 6 of my ancestors were sold on the auction block in 1829 at the second estate sale of Thomas Jefferson. At the time that the Declaration of Independence was written, and it was declared that all men are created equal, my 6th great-grandfather and grandmother were enslaved at that time at Monticello, and their names are on the grave site memorial at Monticello, along with 7 others of my ancestors. So I say that because I want you to know that my roots run deep, 7 generations back to Monticello, and I'm here again to assert that I believe the name should be changed. A library should be an inclusive space and not one that perpetuates oppression. The library name has already been changed several times, but the values of the library have been updated since 1972 when the name was changed. And it's only appropriate that if the values are updated, that you look at the name that you have and make sure that those values align. Now, I'm not going to sit here and argue about Jefferson's greatness because that's not what my DNA represents. It represents the trauma, the oppression, the pain, and the part of Jefferson that most white people want to gloss over when they're talking about his greatness. But unfortunately, that's the part that put Black people on a trajectory of struggle. Back to the values. One of your values says we want our libraries to be comfortable, inviting, accessible spaces where you can work. Our libraries are inclusive. How, and I'm going to ask you, how can you be say that, have that mission, and be inclusive if you have a name of an individual, a president who was not inclusive to Black people? You've heard people speak of Jefferson's library, but unfortunately, he did not encourage the one thing that libraries encourage, reading for Black people. In fact, he discouraged it, and he discouraged writing. And let's not get on the things that he said about Black people, the fact that he felt that Black people weren't there, or the fact that he felt that we had a disagreeable odor. I can go on and on. So as we're having this conversation, it's important that you center the people who were most offended by Jefferson, because other people will speak of his greatness all day. But in reality, a lot of what Jefferson did, his words and actions towards his enslaved community, is directly the opposite of being, we appreciate diversity and a mindful culture. We embrace and amplify voices. He did not amplify the voices of his enslaved people. And no matter how you add it up, divide it, or try to gloss over it, you cannot get away from those facts. The time has come to stop honoring the ugly legacy of racism and bigotry. Names of people that we know represented white supremacy are harmful relics that remind us of racism, discrimination, and oppression. And while we observe what seems to be a unified condemnation, anytime things happen on a national level that have to do with race and racism, it's time that we recognize and take bold action to eradicate that racism within our own community. The precedence has already been set by the Blue Ridge Health District when they changed their name, and the reasons that they changed their name are very much the same, but it doesn't stop there. There were two schools in Northern Virginia, we're still in Virginia, that were named Thomas Jefferson and George Mason that changed their names for the same reason. There was a highway from a Confederate highway that changed last year, again, same reason. So the precedence has already been set for these name changes. And I also say that I just returned from a 7-day civil rights tour down south with approximately 100 members from the Charlottesville community. And we went through Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, and saw all these relics and names and got the history of just how deep racism is. And my takeaway from that is that any inaction in the form of racism, past or present, is continuing to embolden that racism. And until you have a name that represents all people, people can feel comfortable with and be welcome with, any mission statement that you put out around about inclusion rings hollow. And until we as a community can acknowledge the past and no longer adorn those names on our public buildings and spaces, we will never reach a place of healing, of racial healing. And I will stop there and just say that you are at a defining moment right now where you will have to decide. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Ben Doherty.
Thank you. My name is Ben Doherty, they, them pronouns. I have been a patron of JMRL for 22 years. And I am here simply to support Myra Anderson's petition to change the name of the library. I really cannot put it any better than Myra just said it. I just want to add emphasis to all the points that she just made. It is long past time for white people to stop glossing over all of the negative traits and the racism and the oppression that people like Jefferson and Madison perpetuated. And we can talk, as Myra pointed out, about all the great things they did, but we have to stop ignoring all of the negative things that we did. Changing the name is not going to change history. It's not going to remove all of those hundreds of books on Jefferson and Madison that are in the library. It's not going to change people knowing who Jefferson and Madison are. But what it is going to do is take one small step forward towards those values that Myra just mentioned, that libraries should be inclusive and welcoming places for all, and they cannot be so when you are celebrating the names of slave owners, racists, and rapists as part of the title of the library. It's been done before, like Myra just said, the Blue Ridge Health District just did this name change. I was still able to go and get my COVID vaccine shots there, no problem, despite the name change. It does not have to be a problem, and I implore you to take Myra's suggestion and take that step towards upholding the values of the library as places that are inclusive and welcoming for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Laura Sergani.
I come to you as a community member and a educator in the state of Virginia for over 25 years. I've been an educator, an education researcher, a parent volunteer in the school systems here. More than half of that 25 years has been either in Charlottesville, Albemarle County, or Amherst County and surrounding counties. And in my role, I've had the privilege of doing research and working with many of our youth in the community. And I can tell you that the Black and brown youth of this community suffer the trauma of the legacy of the people whose names are borne out on this library system. And they report it to me. They tell me, I feel targeted. I don't feel welcome. I don't feel like my identity is honored or that my history is honored. This is not about preserving or erasing history. It is about acknowledging. The only thing that the white people in this room who are asking you to preserve by saving this name is their white comfort. And I am tired of that. I am tired. And I am just a fraction of the exhaustion of this community. And I am tired of having to explain to white people why their comfort over their name is not more important than the safety, the well-being, and the education of our young people, because they are our future. And if we as a community have become worldwide synonymous with racial violence, how is it not our community's duty to take even this tiny step, this incredibly tiny step, towards acknowledgement and reconciliation of the racial violence, the racial legacy of Jefferson and Madison? Because it is that, it is violent. And I don't know how our children can feel comfort or feel welcome, feel included, feel like they are safe to learn in a space that bears the names of people who would deny their very humanity. This is long overdue, and I am ashamed of the white people in this room who would sit here defending their white people. Ashamed.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Bob Turner.
My name is Robert Turner. I'm a retired UVA professor for almost 33 years. I chaired the Jefferson Hemming Scholars Commission, a very distinguished group that spent a year looking at every aspect of the issue. Did Thomas Jefferson father children by Sally Hemings? We concluded with one very mild dissent that the story is probably not true. I actually have a copy of our 400-page report, which I will donate to the library. I'm also working on a book on Jefferson and slavery. I'm saddened because there is a lot of agreement here. Slavery was a horrible institution. No question about it. We should not apologize for it. But slavery was not just the product of white people. Virtually every slave brought to the United States in chains was enslaved by a black person. And slavery existed legally in parts of Africa until the 1980s. Slavery was wrong and is wrong. it's very important that we try to bring our country together, that we understand that 90% of the men who died in the Civil War fighting against slavery were white. That when Congress enacted the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s, there were 3 black members of Congress, less than 1%. The majority, ironically, mostly Republicans, voted for those rights, and they were right to do so. Now, yes, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. He inherited them from his father and his father-in-law. At the time, it was illegal to free slaves in Virginia. Thomas Jefferson drafted the law that made it legal to manumit slaves in Virginia. Philip Fodder, a left-wing academic who was actually fired during the McCarthy era, edited the complete works of Thomas Paine. And in his introduction, he said, Paine has often been called the first American abolitionist. But because of Thomas Jefferson's 1769 bill to allow the freeing of slaves, he deserves the title instead. In the original draft of his Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson had what we call a Bill of Particulars, criticizing King George III for all the evil things he has done. And one of the things he wrote, he has waged cruel war against human nature itself on a distant people who never offended him by carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thereto. That language you didn't read in high school when you read the Declaration. Why? Because South Carolina and Georgia said if that language stays, we're going to walk out of the convention. So it was dropped. But John Quincy Adams, in 1843, writing in an abolitionist journal in England, said that that draft stands as proof of Jefferson's status as one of the first abolitionists. In his only book, Notes in the State of Virginia, Jefferson denounced slavery. And I quote, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with his wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. The Almighty has no attribute which can take sides with us in such a contest." As a lawyer, Jefferson took several cases from slaves seeking their freedom. In cases like Powell in 1790, Jefferson told the court, under the law of nature, all men are born free. That did not amuse the Virginia judges of the era, and he lost every case.
30 seconds.
All right. I have a 9-page statement here that the footnotes documents Jefferson's incredible record. One last thing. When he was a member of the Second Continental Congress, he was asked to write laws to govern the Northwest Territories. His 6th rule was neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the territory, except in punishment for a crime for which the individual has been duly guilty. I first read that in 1972, and I said, that's the 13th Amendment. And I went to the Congressional Globe, and they said, we are using Jefferson's language to honor his struggle against slavery. Yes, slavery was wrong, but we should respect Jefferson in no small part because of his lifelong efforts to bring it to an end.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker will be Travis Brinton.
Right, good afternoon. Take this off. I'm an attorney here in Charlottesville, and I was speaking with an attorney friend of mine who is one of the opponents of removing the Confederate statues. And he argued that Stonewall Jackson was a person of great integrity. He downplayed his slavery. and that it was a shame to take the statue down. I disagree with him for the same reason that I disagree with the name change. Namely, we don't memorialize people so much because of their personal virtues or whether they were good people or bad people. We memorialize them because of what their legacy means. Stonewall Jackson, his statue needed to be removed because whatever his personal virtues or integrity or whatever may have been, even if I don't argue with that, he's only significant to history as a defender of slavery. That's the only reason that anybody ever made a statue of him. Now, the same is not true of Madison or Jefferson. Without attempting to minimize or justify or gloss over their slavery in any way, their legacies are the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Library of Congress, the University of Virginia, the Federalist Papers, also their proposals to do away with slavery, the Enlightenment ideals that founded our country. Nobody looks at the Jefferson Memorial and thinks that we put that memorial up because we wanted to honor slavery or promote it. Yes, they were slaveholders, we can't forget that, but that's not the thing that defined them and made them significant to history. To the progressives on the board and in the room, I want to make a progressive appeal for not changing the name. I invite you to consider the political consequences of making that change. There's very little you could do at this point that would help the Republicans in the midterms more than pass the name change. The change would give fresh ammunition to the right. They were feeling pretty good about their political prospects going into the midterms with inflation being what it is, Biden's approval ratings being low. And then the Dobbs decision came out overturning Roe, and now the left is very fired up. So they need a reason to go back to their base and say, look, you're the real victims, and you better go vote or everything you hold dear is under attack. From the woke mob, the left-wing extremists, this is what they'll say. And they're coming for everything you hold dear and for everything that defines America. So if this is an issue that resonates with moderates that they can point to, then all the better. They might be able to pull some away from the middle. If the name is changed, I expect that Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity and all of them will point to it and tell their base that, you know, if this is allowed to go on, that the liberals will next try to change the name of the capital of our country. They'll tear down the Washington Monument. They'll try to destroy Mount Rushmore, blah, 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 blah. Now, of course, that's all a slippery slope argument, but the same rationale could lead to all of those things, and that, whatever its virtues, is an argument that will have political costs. And we have to think about those political costs and what real world things, that symbolic change, we would have to pay for. So no, it's not just about white comfort. And I think that pointing to people in the room and saying, if you belong to this skin color and you don't agree with me, then you're racist, I don't think that helps civic discourse. There are very real world consequences to whatever we do. And for that reason, I encourage the board not to change the name. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Cynthia Allen. Did I get that right?
I'll introduce myself. Allen. I've lived in Charlottesville for so I remember when library was in the building which Historical Society had taken children. And my husband and I moved away for 20 years ago. Retired here in 1999, and I've watched Charlottesville grow from a small college town. My brother went here and was chairman of the honor committee and president of undergraduate college at the university. And so I've watched a lot of changes, and they're still going on. But I sent this to chairman of this board and also to the librarian about how Jefferson became the saving grace of the Library of Congress. I'm sure you all know that during the War of 1812, British burned down the White House. Madison made the portrait of George Washington. But the library at the time was in the White House. And so in 1815, Thomas Jefferson sold much of his library to start the Library of Congress. I mean, I want to put the emphasis on the library, not on all the other history that people have brought up today. And it's been very interesting to hear all of the speakers and their viewpoints. But we can copy this for anybody who doesn't know this history. We're in a library. I'm sure there is a copier nearby. And also, I want you all to know, and you've probably been to Monticello many times, if you have not been there on the 4th of July, we are now back up and running with people who come from all over the world who have studied the Constitution. They pledge allegiance to the flag of America. Over the years, I have met people from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. They are so thrilled to be American citizens. Some of them come from the war zone. And this is the place where they can start a new life and be free to lead them. So I encourage you to come up on the 4th of July. Last year we had only 25 people. The year before we canceled it, but there will be 75 new citizens on the West Lawn, and we have between 3,000 and 4,000 people there. And we all know who lived there, and he's the one who really saved our library system. So if anybody wants to copy this, come see me. I think I'm the last leaf on the tree here.
I've got one more,
Oh, you do? All right.
and then we'll open it up.
Okay.
Thank you. Stacey Warren will be our next speaker. Stacey Warren. Okay.
God bless all of y'all. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Warren. Thought I was signing for this, but I'll speak. I'll speak. I'm a mother of 6 children, 14 grandchildren right now, and great-grandmother and great-aunt. The Henderson family has been here since time began. This Coastal Virginia has been here. This family has been here. The Dow family has been here. The Anderson family has been here. A lot of you have been here. Y'all mentioned Thomas, Jefferson, and Madison. I don't know a whole lot about history, but I am a history major from heart. Thompson Jefferson had the backbone to do it, but feared because they had African American family. That alone should change the name. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. And that is the last speaking slot that we had signed up for. If anybody who did not have an opportunity to sign up at the beginning of the meeting would wish to speak, we'll take a few more minutes here and see if we have anybody in the room or online who would like to speak. Online, please go ahead and raise your hand and we'll start going through those in order. Excuse me.
Okay, somebody who signed in as R. Can we get your comment?
Hello.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, I am located in Texas. I happened to come across the webinar this morning when I was looking into my email I held from Charlottesville and Ray's. So I see a little segment that you were going to have today, and I decided I wanted to just say just a little bit. I was born and raised in Charlottesville, Virginia. I graduated from Charlottesville High School. I graduated in Texas, and my family is in Charlottesville. I saw a little bit of what the meeting was going to be about, and I just wanted to say just a little here. I hail from the Swift family from Charlottesville, the Brown family, Williams, the Inge family, and the Haas from Charlottesville. I have attended and visited the library, Jefferson Library, and also the library on Gordon Avenue, two of my favorite libraries. I'd like to speak a little bit on that I'm in this meeting. I would like to say that one suggestion is a name to call it the People's Library. The second thing I would like to say is that history is important. When I walk those stairs, when I walked as a child, my parents told me history of Charlottesville. They also gave me some history of location and buildings in Charlottesville. I have learned a lot about the history of buildings in Charlottesville. So as far as the library, I'd like to say, and what I would like to suggest is that everybody can come to a happy medium in their perspective of a name change. If the name stays, I'd like to say the building will continue to stay. The history does not leave. The history stays. Things change. The same thing. The building does not change. The history remains. Is the perspective of each person that walks up those stairs. For me, I would like for my grandchildren to know the history of the library, but I would like for them to move forward, know that the library is important to everybody, and take those important words and teach their children the same as if the name of the library changes. The same thing as walk up those stairs, like for each and every person to tell their grandchildren about the history, and also to tell them the importance of for forgiveness. Forgiveness of any harm, forgiveness of any negative feelings towards the library, or people that were responsible for the library being built and maintaining it over the years. I'm coming in as a neutral voice because it is still my system, and I would like for each child, each grandchild, when they walk those stairs, they are educated in knowing the history of the building, the history of Charlottesville, and that we, and I say we because it's still my city, even though I like to be able to say, hey, when you go to Charlottesville, go over to the library. For me, to name it, I'm looking at the history and how we must move forward. So I am being neutral, but I like to say from one side, if the name is changed, please come to our meeting and continue to educate your children and to know that the buildings in history here, if the name is not changed, the same. It all comes from the perspective of the person that walks up there, but it helps to know history. So that's what I'm saying, and God bless everyone. I come in as soon as this pandemic lifts up, but I just want to say God bless you all. Our children will know that the history is important. Yes, it's important, but that history, it encompasses all. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, we were having interference from the internet. In writing as well, just so we can make sure that we take that in fully. We'll go on to our next speaker online. Tom Neal, it looks like, is next in line here.
Yeah, yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, just fine. Thank you.
Yes, I'm calling from Baltimore. Just very quick background. I'm a 74 alumnus. 2 daughters went there and 7 other relatives. I'll just, if I can get through it, if I'm going too long, cut me off. I just want to read the letter that I submitted before the meeting to Mr. Unsworth. I'm writing to express my outrage at your proposal to eradicate Thomas Jefferson and James Madison's name from the Charlottesville Regional Library. You've heard from the Reclaim Roots Descendants Alliance. It's time you heard also from UVA alumni and true students of history who view our nation's leaders in the context of their times, not through the prism of historical revisionists. Our founding fathers must be judged in comparison to their American and global peers, not by the uninformed criteria imposed by radical leftists who analyze all by their narrow-minded perspective of virtuous behavior. In the fall of '69, I was considering attending one of my top 2 college choices, Georgetown or Virginia. My father, sister, and many relatives went to Georgetown. I was attending Canisius High, which is a Buffalo Jesuit Catholic high school. And my Jesuit priest college counselor made it clear that attending the premier Roman Catholic university was pretty much a no-brainer. However, my oldest brother was a career Army officer attending UVA for his master's in international relations in the Woodrow Wilson School after an earlier tour in Vietnam. He implored me to visit UVA and strongly consider attending Virginia over Georgetown. After a tour of the lawn, viewing the rotunda, and hearing the story of the university, I was sold. When I was accepted, I chose UVA immediately. Anticipating perhaps some people's perception on me, I was not a child of white supremacist privilege. I attended UVA in an Army ROTC scholarship. My father was retired and I could never have afforded the UVA out-of-state tuition without this scholarship. I chose UVA because of Thomas Jefferson. We're the only university in America founded by a founding father. I majored in history and enjoyed every minute of my 4 years of attendance. If you remove Jefferson and Madison's name from the library, you're spitting in the face of every American patriot and leader who resided in Maryland, Virginia, and South. By today's moral criteria, of course, support of slavery seems and was morally indefensible. However, you have to consider that literally every Western country condoned slavery 2 centuries ago. In case you're unaware of the fact, African slaves were sold by warring tribes to English slave traders. Moral complicity runs far and deep. Eradicate Jefferson, you need to also eradicate all African tribal leaders and all English ship barons who transported the slaves to America. Where does your ethical indignation and hubris end? Jefferson clearly had moral qualms about slavery, even proposed bills to eliminate the importation of slaves. I'm pretty sure some of you didn't know that, or if you did, ignore this historical truism. I believe in facts, not woke revisionism. Read this article. There's an insertion. By the standards of his times, Jefferson was a liberal radical. Because you and the Reclaim Roots Descendants Alliance apparently didn't do your historical homework, you're unaware of this. Furthermore, the core premise of this group has been refuted by a scholarly study that has now been buried or ignored, the Scholars Commission from 2 decades ago. The articles below belie Thomas Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings. That's Professor Turner's reference earlier. Here's my last paragraph. If you care about truth and objective historical analysis, read these articles. Your proposal to remove Jefferson and Madison from the Charlottesville Regional Library is beyond unconscionable. If you truly believe you cannot tolerate their names adorning your library, then move to New York, California, Illinois, or another locale that agrees with your absurd historical conclusions. You live in Charlottesville. It's the home of one of our 2 preeminent founding fathers. Deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Ann Tucson.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes, just fine. Thank you.
Great. So I wanted to say something. And when I heard about the name change, truthfully, I wondered why it had taken so long. My daughter goes to Jewett, which is changing the name to Journey. And it occurred to me that the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library was still the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library. And at first I thought that I supported the name change because I care about the Black citizens in our community. And then I realized I don't really like the name either. And I don't like the name because I'm a woman. And I feel like I walk around Charlottesville and I just feel here is all the history of the white men who did great stuff for us. And if you read history, real history, for example, I recently read the book, Jefferson's Daughters. If you read the history from the point of view of women and from the point of view of Black Americans, it's a different history. And so everybody who is saying, oh, learn your history, don't just learn your history. History is dynamic. history changes. If you read real academic history books and articles, points of view change. And all of the arguments I've heard to keep the name are the same arguments we've heard for the past 50 or 60 years. I mean, history changes. Let's grow and learn. Also, let's talk about history. When was it named the Jefferson Madison Regional Library? It was named the Jefferson Madison Regional Library in the early 1970s. Is that an accident? That is not an accident. They did that in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement to remind everyone, Black Americans and possibly women, because it was the women's movement too, who holds the power and who has always held the power. And it's white men. And so at this point, it's not just Jefferson Madison Regional Library. In my mind, Jefferson and Madison don't really represent the majority of the population. If you think about women and you think about Black people, and I understand some white women love Jefferson and some white women, I get it. I hear you, I've heard you for the last 60 years, I get it. But I just want you to know, it's not just Black people who are opposed to this. It's not just white people who sympathize with Black people. I am a woman. And let's face it, Jefferson, he did not promote education for women. He educated his one daughter in France because he was in France and it made him look good. And his second daughter, he didn't bother. So he was not super great to women either. And I won't even, the Sally Hemings, yeah, let's just, you want to tell your students that story? Do we want to talk about that history? Do you want your students to remember that Jefferson? I mean, let's face it, I don't think you can call that anything but rape. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one more hand that went up there. Our next speaker will be Christina B.
Hello, can everyone hear me okay?
That's fine, thank you.
Hi, yes, my name is Christina. I'm a student at UVA and I received a message from Reclaim Roots on Facebook to join this today. I actually wrote in an email before as well. And I just wanted to come on here and talk because I am married to an immigrant that is from Mexico, and I also have a mixed race son who also is half Mexican. And I feel like the name right now does not represent my son at all, or my husband, or quite frankly, any person of color. So I want to kind of bounce off of what other people were saying about the true history, that we should all learn the true history, not just the whitewashed versions that even myself personally was taught during high school. And so yeah, that's what I wanted to say. So I do support the name change. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. And it looks like we have no further hands up online. I'll put out one last call to anybody in the room or joining us online. If you'd like to make a comment, please do so now. Otherwise, please remember we'll have more opportunities. Yes, please. Come right on up here to the podium.
I don't know if 5 minutes is not funny, but my name is Ruth Henderson, and I was born in 1935, and racism is all I knew until I'm about, I guess, 30. And victims of the victim of racism is what you are missing. We are victims. And being a victim, you suffer in every way possible. And even our foreparents suffered. We're not trying to say make this big change because of this, that, and the other. George Washington may have contributed a lot, but guess what? He got a lot of recognition for that. You know, he was already riding high and he wanted recognition and he probably wanted to get voted in again. So the fact that he did these things is a part of being at the top. But being someone crawling around on the bottom and being kicked around and being deprived of your privileges, now that's something to talk about. So, and then I'm going to end it with this. Charlottesville is making a big change. And if you haven't noticed it, and this is blacks and whites, because some of the things that's going on here in Charlottesville, the whites can't even afford. If we don't nip these problems in the bud, they're on the way up now, and they're going to grow higher. Maybe a name change is a small thing to you all who live good. You know, you don't know what it is to be poor. Some people do. Some people had poverty in their lifetime. But most of you in this room, you don't know poverty, capital P. And when you do face someone that's going through it, the first thing you have is belittle them, hold them back, kick them around, kick them, you know. We're tired of being kicked. And we're not going to be kicked anymore. So changing a name is a small thing. There's a whole lot of work out there to be done. And it's to be done by our race. And see, we're talking as black people. But there are other people that are lighter than us, they're black, they're called black too. So the numbers are grown. And I think the fear that the white man, a white person has is when that number gets so large that we are at the top and you might be at the bottom. That's where the fear is coming in. And that's where I don't see where we have the desire to kick you around like we've been kicked. I don't see, but we're demanding our rights. We don't know what rights, we didn't know what education was. Speaking of the university, they paid a dear person that lived right here in Charlottesville to go to New York to a college for 4 years because they could not go to UVA. UVA got a big name, a beautiful name. Oh yeah, the UVA. UVA and Charlottesville is over here. UVA is over here in Charlottesville. And there's that middle there. And for years, they've been trying to bring them together and they haven't been successful yet. They got a little bit going, but they're not there yet. But what this meeting is all about is getting rid of the old and start with the new, because a change is coming. And I want to tell everybody in this room, get ready. A change is coming. And I'm old, I'm 87. I'm 87. I've got children, you all have children also. And guess what? Your children are not in agreement with slavery. I've talked to so many young white children. They are not in agreement. And those that are in agreement were taught by their foreparents. Thank you, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Change the name, yes, but don't stop with the name.
If we have other speakers
More work to be done.
who have not had a chance yet to speak, please come on up. If anybody has additional comments, please submit them in writing. We need to move on in our agenda, and as long as everybody has had a chance to speak once, I want to make sure we make room for others. And if there are no further comments, we will move along in our agenda. Thank you all very much for the time you've taken to come and speak with us here today. As I said before, I hope that we'll have further opportunities to hear more from the public on this. We've cleared continuing education and committee appointments and reports off of our agenda in anticipation that this might take a little longer. So we'll move right on into new business and the discussion of the request to change the regional library system name. I'll open with you, David. I believe you have a report based on some of the initial questions that we collected at our last meeting.
Thank you, Thomas. And I want to echo that thanks to everyone who took the time out of their day to speak today. At our last meeting of the Regional Library Board, I was given 2 directives by you all. First, to research and report where JMRL's name is codified and what mechanisms exist to make any changes there. And second, to review what other local organizations' processes have been for reviewing name changes. So I've prepared a brief presentation, if you all will bear with me, to share what I've learned in the last month.
Could you tell us your name?
My name is David Plunkett. I'm the director of the Regional Library System.
Was Charlottesville Albemarle?
Charlottesville, Albemarle, Green, Louisa, and Nelson. Okay. So a history and authority for the regional library's name. Has been mentioned a few times today. This library system has gone through several different names. The original library system was founded in 1921, and it was known as the Charlottesville Public Library. In 1948, that name was changed to the Charlottesville Albemarle Public Library. In 1958, that name was changed to the McIntyre Public Library. In 1972, it was the Thomas Jefferson Regional Library, ever so briefly. And then in 72 and codified in 74, it was the Jefferson Madison Regional Library. So let's look at each of those. In 1921, no record exists to show the initial naming process for the library. There was the only record, Lisa asked at the last meeting, are there any stipulations on what the library could be named? The only stipulation came from Paul Goodloe McIntyre, who did not want it to be named the McIntyre Public Library. He gifted the original building to the city of Charlottesville. But there's no record showing how they came up with the name Charlottesville Public Library. It seems like a no-brainer. In 1948, no records exist that I could see, but there was a change to the Charlottesville Albemarle Public Library name was reflected in the library board minutes for that year. That was the year that Albemarle added bookmobile service per contract and gained representation on the library board. So the board went from being only Charlottesville residents to being Charlottesville Albemarle residents, and the name was just changed to the Charlottesville Albemarle Public Library. In 1958, the library, the library changed the name to McIntyre Public Library. And this was the library board that did this on August 28, 1958. It was decided by the board to have the names of the library changed from Charlottesville Albemarle Public Library to the McIntyre Public Library. This was due to the death of Mr. McIntyre, who no longer could object to having that name. So it was the McIntyre Public Library at that point in 1958. Okay, the next big change is about regional library boards. So I've got this state code that governs regional library boards now, two small snippets here. Neither one of them mention the authority to name libraries. They mostly have to do with the fiscal responsibility of regional libraries and regional library boards. So this is state code 42.139, regional library boards. It talks about the creation of regional library boards, how board members are appointed, saying how board members can be removed, that board members can self-govern, collect their own bylaws, rules and regulations, and they have control of the expenditure of all monies credited to the Regional Free Library Fund, and that they can accept donations of libraries. I'm sorry, of money or libraries. In the powers of the Regional Library Board, the powers specifically stated by state code said library boards, regional library boards have the authority to execute contracts with the state, with the library boards of the respective jurisdictions if they were organized that way, and any and other all agencies for the purposes of administrating a public library service within the region. Okay, so in addition, there's more financial information. The regional library board is empowered to sell assets, including real estate. So why did the library system regionalize, as it was Charlottesville, Albemarle at the time? So some of these benefits are the current benefits of regionalization, but here was the overall broad thinking. The last one here is the most important one. But it's pooled resources for the public, access to the entire collection. Now it's physical and digital for the entire region. So those 5 jurisdictions that I mentioned. There's one system and public point of access for a library website, one system and public point of access for a library catalog, one system and public point of access for public computers, internet, Wi-Fi, printing capabilities that did not exist in 1972. Also, a regional library system has singular departments for library administration, IT support, collection development, which is selection and ordering of over 40,000 new items a year currently, professional cataloging of those materials, and the item processing for all those 40,000 materials that come in. The big reason, though, that Charlottesville, Albemarle, Green, Louisa, and Nelson joined forces to create JMRL was because of state aid funding, which was amplified in the 70s. Basically, the state incentivized localities to get together and share their resources in order to provide library service. So that leads to 1972, where the Thomas Jefferson Regional Library was established by an original regional agreement. That agreement was between Charlottesville, Albemarle, Louisa, and Nelson. So everybody but Greene County that's currently members of JMRL. In that regional agreement, which is between those bodies, it's between the governments of those jurisdictions, the Regional Public Library heretofore established as the McIntyre Public Library shall be designated as the Thomas Jefferson Regional Library with its offices at the McIntyre Library. So shortly thereafter, within a month basically, the library board heard comment from a library board member who made a plea to them to change the name from the Thomas Jefferson Regional Library to the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library. Right before service had actually expanded. At the time, it was just Charlottesville and Albemarle, but plans were in place to create new formal libraries in Louisa and in Nelson. The library board did this by their own vote on July 18th, 1972. They said, we're going to move to change the name to the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library. Our archives include a letter that explains why that decision was made. Basically, the board member who presented it wanted to celebrate the special friendship between Jefferson and Madison, even though Madison doesn't live in the service area or never lived in the service area that JMRL covers. It's Orange County, and Orange County is not one of the regions of the state. Now that happened immediately. So the library name, the new regional library hadn't really started. The library board voted to start calling themselves JMRL. In 1974, the name was changed to JMRL formally in an amended regional agreement. So that regional agreement was opened up 2 years later because Greene County wanted to join the regional library system. So this is a letter from my equivalent, the director at the time, to the jurisdiction saying, enclosed is a revised version of the regional agreement that was signed in 72. Two big things are happening. Greene County is joining the regional agreement, and the name of the regional library is officially changed from Thomas Jefferson to JMRL. So while the library board had made a change, it wasn't official until the 5 jurisdictions signed off saying that here's the new name of the library system. The contract itself says, I apologize for the faces. The city of Charlottesville, the counties of Albemarle, Louisa, and Nelson have heretofore established a library system in such contract known as Thomas Jefferson Regional Library, which is now known as Jefferson-Madison Regional Library. And the number 1 amendment there is that the Regional Public Library heretofore established at the Thomas Jefferson Regional Library shall be designated as the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library. So that designation was made by Charlottesville, Albemarle, Greene, Louisa, and Nelson in 1974. The regional agreement was reopened in 1982, in 1991, and 2013. The same language is in the 82 and 91 regional agreements, saying that the city of Charlottesville and the counties of Albemarle, Louisa, Nelson, and Greene have established, pursuant to law, a regional library system known as the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library. The current the current regional agreement says that the creation of the regional library, the participating localities, goes on to say they ratify and reaffirm the creation of the regional library and the Board of Trustees for the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library. So part of what I did was reach out to JMRL's legal counsel and to the legal counsel of some of our member jurisdictions. The legal counsel that the library board has received is that the authority for changing the library name rests with member jurisdictions, with Charlottesville, Albemarle, Greene, Louisa, and Nelson. The organization was named by the 1972 regional agreement, and the regional library name has been codified in every subsequent regional agreement between those bodies, so that the name change would require a modification or amendment of the current 2013 regional agreement, which would need to be signed off on by all 5 member jurisdictions. This opinion was seconded by the city of Charlottesville attorney and generally referenced in communication from the Louisa County attorney. So the recommendation is that the regional agreement is due for a mandated 5-year review in 2022-23. It's supposed to be every 5 years. There is a review committee. The last signing was in 2013. That the board authorized the library director to ask to convene that meeting this fall to discuss this issue with member jurisdictions. So here's the wording in the current regional agreement that the library is operating under about this review committee. A regional library agreement review committee shall be convened and meet no less than once every 5 years. The review committee shall meet to review this agreement and recommend any amendments that it may propose thereto, and that the chief executive officer of each participating locality shall appoint one member to the review committee. The regional library director shall provide all necessary information and support required for the review committee to perform its functions. So that would be one appointee from each of the 5 jurisdictions that make up JMRL. If there were changes made to the regional agreement at that point, they would need to take them back to their boards of supervisors or city councils to vote on before that could come back as an amended regional agreement. I was also asked to review the name change processes of other organizations in the area. The health district, quite a few people have mentioned today, changed their name from the Thomas Jefferson Health District to the Blue Ridge Area Health District. That decision was made internally by the BRHD staff and director at that time. They had to inform the state of the change, but at that point did not have to ask permission. They just told the state, we're making this change. The public engagement that the health district had was all about what the new name was going to be. It was not about their choice of whether or not to make a name change. That change was made administratively. Albemarle County Public Schools is a very robust policy now. They established their own policy because they couldn't find comparable school board policies to mimic when they began a review of their names. They were reviewing every eligible school name. The only ones that are not eligible, I believe, are the ones that are historic landmarks. And for that reason, there's either a different process or it's not possible. I'm not sure. So in general, their process was to set up an advisory committee, contact any living relatives of the named individuals whose names are on the buildings, extensive committee work and engagement by those committees, make a recommendation from the committee to the superintendent. The superintendent makes a recommendation to the school board, then the school board votes. That's their process. When Albemarle County removed the statue, the Confederate statue that was in front of their courthouse, it's not a name change, but they went through a similar process of engagement. They used an engagement tool, so they paid for publicinput.com to have a platform where they could collect all the information they got, having received unsolicited over 100 different forms of communication about the name of JMRL, which you all haven't even had the chance to talk about yet. I am very jealous of that one portal for getting all this information. They had a virtual tour of the site. They had panel comment collections and questionnaires and panel discussions. I'm sorry, public comment collections and questionnaires and panel discussions before moving the statue. Charlottesville City Council renamed the 2 downtown parks. They received a recommendation for the Blue Ribbon Commission that was looking at the statues in the parks, recommending the renaming of those parks. They collected suggestions for new names via public survey, and then City Council voted on that. They chose to rename them again later the following year by council vote using the top names remaining in a public survey. So they put a survey out to the public and made the change. City Council made that change. Finally, the University of Virginia has a Names and Memorials Committee, which is created as a reconfiguration this year from a different committee that I'm not sure what that was called. They're charged with delineating principles and protocols for naming and potentially renaming buildings at the university. They're going to review individual cases and make recommendations to the university president, who will then make recommendations to the board of visitors. So those are the 5 organizations that I've been in contact with. Are there any questions about the information that I just shared with the library board?
Can I ask a question?
I'm afraid, well.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were-
Okay, you're okay. Any questions from board members?
Well, first, David, I want to thank you so much for this report and for putting all of these things together. And I know we're not permitted to speak to the assembly, but again, just thanking everybody for being here and thanking for everybody for all the comments. I think what I'm most really struck by is the fact that the reason we have JMRL as the name was because one person on the board wanted to acknowledge the friendship between Jefferson and Madison. It wasn't about their libraries. It wasn't about, oh, look what they did for the Bill of Rights and the Declaration and et cetera. It was, these guys were friends. So we essentially have like an Enlightenment version of a bruh love library system. Like really, that is where we are right now. We are here at this impasse because like someone thought Jefferson and Madison deserved to have a buddy film and it turned out to be our library system. That's interesting to me. I'm also very encouraged to see that this momentum. I spoke with someone, I learned from someone from the formerly Thomas Jefferson Universalist Unitarian Church, which removed Jefferson's name, which makes sense because Jefferson was not someone who was really a big fan of religion, personally. And so I just thought it was interesting that the church changed its name and the church has still been able to serve the people that it serves. And I really do believe that we are in a moment where our democracy is being challenged in a variety of ways. And I feel as though we have the opportunity to make some true progress to reflect some of the growth that Charlottesville has made. And it seems to me that a name change of a library system is a small step in my mind, but with very large consequences. And I do look forward to some kind of creative ways that we might be able to get to that outcome, to have a library system that actually aligns with the values that it purports. I looked at lots of the materials that you assembled for us, a lot of the letters, and one of the things that really struck me from one of the divisions that was very upset with the change was they sent the email and at the bottom it said, blank county, I forgot which, is a diverse and inclusive community. And I was like, well, how is this a diverse and inclusive community when you are working so hard to keep the names of slaveholders on the library? Like, I don't know, those don't go together. So I think if we really want to live into our values, this is an opportunity.
I have a question. I am from Charlottesville, born and bred. A lot of people say that they've been here 30 years, 50 years, 15 years. I am a product of this community. And as Ms. Henderson pointed out, I have been part of the town and gown. I attended the university and got a degree from there, but it was like being in a different world. I'm not sure if and I might add, for those of you who do not know, I know what prejudice is, because I am also a product of the last family that home was taken in Vinegar Hill. But my concern is, do we have the authority to say, you know, this is the name I would like to have, I want it changed? Do we as a board have the authority to do that?
To change the name of the library system would require an amendment of the regional agreements by the 5 jurisdictions that make up JMRL. So JMRL can work creatively to engage in that process, but this board cannot change the name of the library system.
I'm just wrapping my name around the head. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the idea that in 1972, people were able to get together and just doop, doop, doop. And then now here we are, like 50 years later, saddled with something that many in the community don't want. And there's nothing we can do about it. That doesn't feel like a possibility to me. It just feels very frustrating and just odd, really, that this library is like a buddy film. I was so glad to know that. Like, it was just because Jefferson and Madison were friends. Like what?
And my understanding from, oh, I'm sorry, Michael, I see you've got your hand up there. Please go ahead.
Go ahead, Thomas.
I was just going to say, my understanding from the conversations I've had with David and with Jim, our counsel, is that decision in 1972 wouldn't have stood on its own had the funding jurisdictions not all agreed with the direction of the name change when they signed the contract. So if the idea of that pairing and the name change didn't sit well with them, we would have had the same conversation that we're having now of how to proceed and get everybody on the same page with something. Michael, yes, please.
So I'd like to also thank everyone who has spoken here last month and this month, and the many people. It's over 100 comments so far, and as David pointed out, have been unsolicited by us so far, but not specifically solicited by phone, mail, and email. As an interesting note, all those people are exercising at least 2 of the 5 freedoms set out in the First Amendment by James Madison. This input is valued, really valued. I've done my best to read every comment that's come in, all 100 pages, and I've sort of tried to consolidate into some big picture observations that take everything into account. And I'm keeping in mind that my role is to make thoughtful decisions that are in the best interest of the organization. One thing that I've done while thinking through this is look to other organizations that have already put some thought into how to grapple with complex legacies of important historical figures. As David shared with us, the UVA Naming and Memorials Committee is working to articulate general principles and protocols that would guide decisions about naming and contextualizing. That work is in progress because as David pointed out, that committee had been reconstituted recently. But I read an interview with the chair of that committee who pointed to similar work that's completed by a Yale committee to establish principles on renaming. They spent a great deal of time putting thought into articulating underlying principles that would guide them in decisions about how and when to name or honor or rename. I've read that report. I believe it's 2016, and I can share a link to that with anyone who's interested. One thoughtful approach that was highlighted by that Yale committee was the acknowledgement that human lives are complex, and therefore it is useful to identify the concept of a figure's principal legacy. I'm putting air quotes, that's their phrase, principal legacy, but I'll continue to use it. They wrote, asking about principal legacies directs us to consider not only the memory of a namesake, but also the enduring consequences of the namesake in the world. As the Oxford English Dictionary defines it, a legacy is a long-lasting effect. Principal legacies, as we understand them, I'm continuing with the words of the Yale Commission, are typically the lasting effects that cause a namesake to be remembered. Even significant parts of a namesake's life or career may not constitute a principal legacy. Scholarly consensus about principal legacies is a powerful measure. So as we consider and try and digest the public input that we've received so far, I think it's clear to me that many people primarily associate Jefferson and Madison with their practice of slavery. But it's also clear that whatever the origin of the name was at the time, over the last 50 years, many people have come also primarily to associate these figures with powerful and fundamental American principles and ideals. That's just what we've seen now. We've seen half the people have one kind of viewpoint and half the people have another, and we need to try to do our best to understand both of those perspectives. Lisa, or Trustee Woolfolk, has already kind of given us a passionate explanation or spoken to the first viewpoint, and I agree with many of the things that she says, but I feel like it doesn't give us a complete picture, and so I thought I would take a minute to round out the picture to try and characterize in some detail what I'm hearing from the thinking that goes into the second viewpoint. In my comments, I'm mostly going to focus on Thomas Jefferson, since he seems to get sort of the lion's share of the attention, but there could be an entire similar discussion about James Madison and how his legacy, especially the Bill of Rights, ties directly with the library's mission and values relating to freedoms to read, freedoms of expression, and so forth. So I thought I'd start by quoting some of words from President Biden, who gave an address on Independence Day of last year with some words. He said, Thomas Jefferson's words about liberty and equality literally changed the world. They help define who we are, guide what we do, remind us of the work that history has given us in our own time. I've long said America is unique. Unlike every other nation on earth, we were founded on an idea. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And while we have never fully lived up to those words, we have never given up on them. They continue to animate us, and they remind us that at our best, this is what we as Americans believe. And I've resisted the temptation to try and do that in a President Biden voice. That was my own interpretation, my own rendition of but it's the words that he said. And it kind of struck me that of all the choices President Biden could have made, he picked those words from Thomas Jefferson as the foundational principle of America. And elsewhere, he sort of echoed this, saying that this idea defines us as a country. And the importance attached to these words is not a new invention of President Biden's. It's kind of consistent throughout history through other historical figures. Frederick Douglass, for example, was not only the descendant of an enslaved person, he himself was an enslaved person that gained his freedom. He came to view the Constitution and the Declaration as anti-slavery documents, saying the principles contained in that instrument, referring to the Declaration, are saving principles. He said that the signers of the Declaration were, quote, statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final. Slavery and oppression were not. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Martin Luther King, moving forward in time, was also a descendant of enslaved persons. As the leader of the great civil rights struggle of his time, he also called on the power of these principles rather than rejecting them. He said that the Emancipation Proclamation was the offspring of the Declaration of Independence. He said, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. To King, this creed was not an obstacle to justice, it was the path to justice. And more recently, President Obama, in a 2013 proclamation, said that what unites us as Americans is our allegiance to an idea articulated more than 2 centuries ago. And I won't quote Jefferson's words again for you, but President Obama went on to repeat those words. And I'd like to say a few words about the connection between these ideals and the very specific milestone that was achieved in our own building. We've dedicated a room in the Central Library and more recently a historical marker outside the library to the Swanson versus UVA case heard in the Central Library building, which was previously a courthouse, in which UVA's rejection of Gregory Swanson's application to its law school on the basis of race was overturned. I've read both the legal motion by Swanson's team of attorneys, including Thurgood Marshall, and the resulting ruling requiring UVA to admit Swanson. Both the motion and the ruling involved a straightforward citation of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment reads in part, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So we hear in the 14th Amendment, equal protection, life, liberty. They're very familiar echoes of Jefferson's all men are created equal and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's a reason for this. While the powerful principles in the Declaration are not actually law, the Constitution and its amendments are. So the 14th Amendment, in part, was the necessary codification into law of the core concept of personal equality. So there's a clear and direct line from all men are created equal to the Swanson result that is so important to us locally. That result did not happen in spite of Jefferson's legacy. It happened because of Jefferson's legacy, and this is something that we should all be able to celebrate. So it's clear from these examples there are well-established traditions and reasons to celebrate the legacies of these men. These are not Confederates who fought against their country. In fact, some of the strongest critics of Jefferson's principles came from Confederate figures who called the Declaration a pack of self-evident lies. These men are founding fathers that established the principles that embody what is good about our country. In this view, the Jeffersonian principle is not the embodiment of slavery, it is the embodiment of anti-slavery. In this view, echoed by Douglass, King, Obama, and others, all men are created equal is not an expression of white supremacy. It is literally the opposite of the idea that some people are superior to others based on the color of their skin. And I think I am using the word literally correctly in this case. In this view, Jefferson's legacy is not the problem, it is the solution. And it's clear that for many in our community, from the input we've heard, the enduring value of these principles outweigh the complex reality that their authors did not themselves live up to them. So I know that I've spoken at length because this is such an important matter, and some folks may be understandably be zoning out by now, but I want to wrap up by saying a few things about some possibilities of a path forward. In the public comment last month, we heard that the names Jefferson and Madison made some community members feel so unwelcome that they felt unable to visit the library. And Thomas, you said that was heartbreaking. and I agree. In subsequent public comment, we've also heard from multiple other community members that removing these names would be seen as a rejection of fundamental values and would make them feel unwelcome and unable to visit the library. So we want to be welcoming and inclusive, but it's clear that by being inclusive to some, we are being exclusionary to others, and vice versa. The difficult truth in today's environment is that there is no magic bullet, no single magic bullet that works for everyone. We could only pretend there's a magic bullet by ignoring, that is, excluding some of the perspectives we've heard from one side or the other. So since that is the case, what's the best we can do? One thing that has struck me from reading the comments is that we have two different worldviews, and neither of those does much to acknowledge the perspective of the others. So I'd like to see a robust, well, especially since we as a board cannot change the name of the library, whether we like it or not, or whether we want to or not. I'd like to see us proceed with a robust contextualization, an exhibit or other materials that give air to both of these viewpoints, clearly explaining the legacies, the important legacies of Jefferson and Madison, and why so many celebrate them, while also fully describing the individual failings and of the men who failed to live up to their own principles. So as everybody is saying, let's acknowledge this, let's acknowledge that. My solution is we need to robustly acknowledge both of those viewpoints and make sure that we make that clear for everyone. This approach would be in line with a 2020 decision by the UVA Board of Visitors. Oh my goodness. I'm almost done, I promise. This approach would be in line with a 2020 decision by the UVA Board of Visitors to direct university leadership to, quote, engage historians and other experts to contextualize the statue of Thomas Jefferson on the north side of the rotunda, to tell the broader story about his contributions to the university, the nation, and the world, as well as contradictory writings and actions that were an integral part of his life and work. And that's in the minutes of their proceedings. I can send a link to that to anyone who's interested. So concluding, the contradiction between the principles and the actions of these men is a central paradox of the American identity. But I believe that a thoughtful approach to describing both of these aspects and representing and amplifying the resulting perspectives is the only way that we can accommodate everyone in a region with diverging viewpoints, as we've heard. It's the only approach that can truly be characterized as inclusive. And I thank everyone for your attention and your patience with that, with those lengthy comments.
Thank you very much, Michael. I want to make sure we have a chance for all of our board members here to speak. Michael, I did just want to address one thing real quick, to say that although, as we've heard from David and from the council, we ourselves cannot directly change the name. I don't believe that removes our voice from this process. We are still, the Board of Trustees here, and I think we do still have tasks to consider going forward to try to enact a change if the board so chooses. That could include suggestion either of a specific name or of the request to reconsider the name as we open up the 5-year review process of that funding agreement. So just to put back out there on the table, though we did say at the beginning, it's not directly in our hands. I don't want to leave that to sound as if we are powerless or without a voice in the decision-making process. Thoughts from anybody else? Questions?
I would say the most valuable that we've taken is already or has occurred here today, when we're here from numerous people who've come with both sides of the issue, and we are this small, and I have every faith in our trustees as most smartest and honorable, but this is not just, it is the name change here, but it is a national issue on every level of how we solve these problems. And when you say we can't change it, we can make a recommendation, but the people who can change it will be the review committee, and this information has to continue. It doesn't stop here. if they don't get what we've heard, either through information from us or by participating, we're missing the chance. The importance is information and knowledge about, call it content, contextualizing history, revealing history, is acknowledging and learning. And that's what we're doing, and that has to move in some kind of step to the people who do make the decision.
And I think that's maybe where our best conversation goes in the next month, is how do we compile, how do we continue to gather, and what is our process to move forward to make a decision to make? Yes.
I just want to talk a bit about framing. This idea that somehow we've arrived at an issue at which there are simply two sides. Some people like the name, some people don't like the name. Who are we to say? I think that that's the wrong frame. I think that what we are actually talking about when we start to look at these issues, it's not about whether somebody is in favor of slavery or, I mean, the defenses of American slavery that we've heard here in the year 2022, I find them personally appalling. But I do think it is interesting to consider that what we are trying to do is to be that which we say we are. If we are a regional library, if we are a public library for the whole public, what we need to do, I would think, would be to live into the values that we believe will help us ensure a brighter, more holistic, more welcoming community. This is not about like including some people and excluding others. I think that language is unfair. I think it's a bit imprecise, because what I'm trying to understand and what I'm trying to articulate is, I don't want us to drill this down into pro-name, anti-name, because what we're actually, I think, dealing with, because for me, I agree with a lot of the things that Mike has said, but one thing that I think is true, the principles that are in the documents that are being described about freedom, liberty, et cetera, those exceed the boundaries of the men whose names are attached to them. The concepts of freedom and liberty are larger than Jefferson. They are larger than Madison. And they exist because democracies are made up of living, breathing people who change. I don't know, it just feels to me like, I know lots of people are kind of feeling these different ways, but there's a lot of quotes about Jefferson, and one of the ones that I absolutely agree with, and I think it was quoted from the podium, Jefferson, there's a lot of books about Jefferson, but he only wrote one. And in it, he talked about how he knew that he was in the wrong on slavery. And he said, I tremble for my country when I remember that God is just, and his justice cannot sleep forever. And there is no aspect of the Almighty that can side with white people in this conflict. That time is coming. It's past due. It's past due. And it just feels like to think about what the library gives to communities. I am a big fan. I'm a big book nerd. I'm a literature professor. I love books, love them. My whole life I have loved books. And it seems to me that that true energy of what a library does and brings and provides should be robust enough and substantial enough that we can serve our service areas. We can provide the things we continue to provide, and not being called Jefferson Madison will not impede our ability to do that. And I also don't believe that somebody who is looking at the library and says, well, if Jefferson and Madison's names aren't on there, I won't feel welcome anymore. Like, I don't think that's a viable I just don't think that's a viable reason to not do anything, honestly.
Thank you. I usually refrain in my position here, but since we're not voting on this and it's going to be Tony's chair next month, I'll go ahead and say, Lisa, I agree with so much of what you're saying, but I come at this idea of why we shouldn't drill down slightly different. Hearing all of the feedback we're getting today, for me, it's kind of reinforcing that we're having a legacy put upon us as an organization that we as an organization don't have a great deal of direct attachment to. And that's one of my big concerns about how do you find a way to settle this appeasing both sides is, you know, it doesn't have that much to do with the organization as it stands here today. And I think in 2022, we're seeing a big movement past honorific naming of institutions, of buildings, of gifts in general, you know, for this reason, that it is impossible to maintain this kind of agreement in perpetuity on the legacy, be it the principal legacy or the broader legacy of an individual. And so, you know, anyway, that as we hear so much of the feedback today, that's what I've kind of been wrestling with. I just thought I'd say it out loud. Yeah.
Another point that you know also from the information, we already have 2 counties, one of which is Louisa, that I represent, who has already produced a resolution that they are opposed, that they will oppose any change to the library.
I thought that was so interesting too. I really did. That there's 2 counties that seem to be prepared to secede from the regional agreement if the name isn't changed. That's very telling, in my opinion. That's quite telling.
I was disappointed to see that those announcements came through before we had the opportunity even to have.
If you have the conversation, I mean, people are putting their foot down about what they really want. These are folks.
I thought Lisa said that the name isn't changed. So in other words, that they keep the name that they already have. That's what I read.
I think that I thought that part of
They oppose any change.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, oppose any change. So that means Jefferson, Madison stay.
Exactly.
Or if they stay, they go.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, that step has not been decided. That requires a legal contract with and dealings between the counties and the board of supervisors and the regional library. They're under contract.
I realized that, but I think they stated.
There is that threat from some.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yes, the threat.
I realize what they can't do.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought, yes.
I want to make sure we get Alita here in the conversation. Thank you very much, Alita.
Hi. I also found that striking that the jurisdictions put forth these resolutions without even consulting their constituents. I mean, it's just like, okay, these guys are sitting there at the head of the table and saying, we're going to do this, regardless of what other people in their jurisdiction are saying. You know, they put that out before even hearing what the other people in the area are thinking, as less known, you know, what they want.
Yeah.
But isn't that the pattern of our government right now? You know, what you want is, I thought loud enough to get it.
Yeah, if you stomp hard enough. I just really can't believe that we are at this. It's very sad. It's very sad. They didn't get a chance to hear all that we were able to hear today, but they were able to put out resolutions to say, we oppose any changes, and this is, I don't know, it just feels like they're trying to corner us into a box. And it makes me feel like I'm being pushed into keeping something that I have heard from many people is not in line with the value of the actual organization. And it makes me wonder if they're that committed to keeping the name, what means more to them? The name of the library or the services that the library provides and what the library does? You know, like that to me, it just I don't know. It just feels like we are trying to move toward a more complete and a full definition of freedom for everybody. And it's not possible to revere white supremacist slave owners and honor the descendants of enslaved people. You can't do both. And this idea that there's either you side with the descendants or you side with the slaveholder, that's just not the choice.
Both things are true.
Things like,
yeah.
Tony, Meredith, want to make sure you guys have.
I guess my question is, what are our options? Are our options to say we would like to have a committee for the 5-year, also consider a name change? Is that what our only option is at this point? I mean, I guess we're all a little confused about.
That's the only way that the name would legally change.
Is if the funding agreement and the jurisdictions who sign it agree to a change and sign the agreement with the new name.
But I guess what I'm saying is we're supposed to have a 5-year committee anyway. We could say, and so you're saying the board would have the option to say, we would like this committee to also consider and consult with the public and hear what the public has to say and think about possible name ideas. Is that what we're saying that we could do?
This board could decide to make some sort of recommendation, to collect some sort of information, to give me things to bring to them to say, here's what the library board feels, here's what the library board sees as the mission of the library and the name of the library and where the library board would like to go forward with that. As Kathy said, two of these jurisdictions are on record there. So it's an uphill battle definitely for this library board to come up with some arguments that will make sense. So I think that the board has to really, if this board wants this, we have to get creative about how to get that word to the folks that actually do get to make the decision.
it just feels like a, oh, I'm sorry.
No, and then, so then I'm going to say then the committee would then discuss, make a recommendation, but then each of those jurisdictions would then have to vote. So the city council would have to vote, Board of, okay.
Supervisor Albemarle has to vote, Green, we all have to vote.
It's a contract, it's an agreement between the five of them. It's not like a 4-to-1 vote or a 3-to-2 vote makes a change. They are contracting with this body. They created this body, and by this agreement, they're telling this body to provide library services. Each of the five of them has to agree to any changes to that agreement if the agreement is between them.
And for us, are we going to then say we're going to continue this discussion next month? Is that our way forward?
I hope, kind of keeping an eye on the clock and on the rest of our.
I just know that we are needing to vote on our budget and some other things. And I don't want to say this is not an important issue.
This is.
I want to, I don't think we never have a discussion and then make a decision that time. So it seems like there'd be more chances for the public to also write in and to come back or whatever and for us to consider.
Exactly. I'd like to make sure Tony has a chance if he wants to say anything here, but that's kind of my hope. Is that,
thank you for clarifying, because I just wanted to see.
As we sort of wrap up conversation here on this subject today, we move into our month between meetings to give ourselves an opportunity to follow up with David on any further questions we have, continue to hear the outreach that I'm sure will come from the coverage of this meeting and the continued conversation, and start to look at what that process of being creative looks like. And I think that we can take a bit of time if we need to make sure that we get that right to move forward. Tony.
So my agenda here, and I realize that I will be taking the president's chair starting July 1st. My agenda here is to make sure that the area's most inclusive, diverse, and free community resource doesn't get sidetracked or handicapped by this discussion. I think this is a good discussion. I think it needs to happen. I think we can probably come up with a plan that will allow everybody to at least have input. If not a decision-making process. But I think that Thomas is right that this is just the beginning of the process. And going forward, we need to be sure that everybody's voice is heard, and that we then use whatever authority we have to help the jurisdictions make the right decision.
Thank you. Any last thoughts,
I
comments?
just want to throw out, just to be clear, we are in a 5-regional system. 2 of the regions have already passed resolutions rejecting any name change without any deliberation. I am not feeling optimistic that we'll be able to somehow persuade them of this. And it makes me wonder, are they willing to pull out of the regional agreement over this issue? Is it that, are they that committed to, or to their adoration of Jefferson and Madison, that they will just say, we don't want to have a library with y'all anymore, thanks, nice knowing you?
So I can, maybe if I can try and answer that, and David, you'll tell me if I get it right or not. The regional agreement, there is a regional agreement, and it continues indefinitely until such time as all 5 agreements, just all 5 regions, all 5 jurisdictions agree to a change. So there is no need for either jurisdiction to pull out of the agreement or succeed, as you put it. It's just they have an effective veto power. And if they exercise that, you know, as it doesn't say the word veto, but if they exercise, it's effectively a veto. If they exercise the veto power, status quo continues indefinitely. So David, let me know if I've gotten that wrong. But I think the idea that there were some comments by Louisa County about withholding funding and so forth. And I think that was very early in the process before they perhaps understood all of the legal ramifications of this sort of unanimous contract that they're in. So as I understand it right now, there's really nothing on the table about jurisdictions withdrawing unless the 5 get together and they mutually decide, hey, we're going to go our own ways. But failing that, which itself would have to be, you know, sort of unanimously agreed on. But failing that, I don't think there's a scenario where we're seeing regions withdraw, jurisdictions withdraw.
Yeah, I mean, the jurisdictions themselves would have to make that decision. There's no, in the regional agreement, there's a provision for a jurisdiction leaving JMRL, but there's no provision for a jurisdiction or the library asking another one to leave or anything like that. It has to be, it's an agreement between those 5. When it gets opened up, if there are things in there that they cannot agree on, then they would have that discussion about, you know, what do we move forward with? How does that look? So if there are things that fundamentally these 5 jurisdictions cannot come to, you know, they reopen the agreement, they decide these are the important things we need to do, then it's up to them to decide whether or not to change it or not. The library board doesn't get a say. I can provide a lot of information to them. I can certainly, you know, make the will of the library board known. We can provide all sorts of things, but in the end, those 5 will have to agree or disagree.
Thank you.
But David, was I correct when I said that just opening the regional agreement doesn't involve any termination or expiration? If sort of as you described, they can't reach an agreement on one or more items, that doesn't dissolve the agreement. It just remains in force.
No, the only stipulation is that every 5 years there is a review committee at which the 5 jurisdictions will, as the slide showed earlier, will talk about any potential amendments. So if they get together and there is no, they think, oh, this is fine, we're going to leave it as it is, then it remains in perpetuity.
Thank you. All right. Barring any further questions, concerns, or comments, I'd like to thank everybody for their thoughtful discussion on an important and powerful topic. And we will bring this back up again next month for further discussion about where to go with the regional agreement committee, about possible further public hearings to get more input, things like that. Tony, we will be in your capable hands. Thank you very much. Our second item of new business was a discussion of the separate administrative services agreement renewal. This is different than the joint funding agreement. David, if you would explain the item to us.
Sure. So the regional library contracts with the city of Charlottesville to provide certain administrative services. They include HR, payroll, network support, purchasing and procurement. It's an invaluable asset for JMRL. We work very closely with the city of Charlottesville. This is the boring part. And it is due for review every 3 years. So I've been in some communications with the city of Charlottesville about this agreement. They have the only wording that, since we were also discussing kind of the name change, the only wording that the city attorney wanted added was that the regional agreement supersedes the administrative agreement. So if something changes at the regional level, then the administrative agreement needs to be looked at again because it might change the parameters. So the price that JMRL pays for this administrative services is written into the regional agreement. So that decision would have to come from the 5 jurisdictions as well. So it's in your packets. I will share briefly. The only changes that we kind of made were the dates, that language that I just mentioned about the.
If we could have quiet at the back of the room, thank you very much. We are still holding our meeting.
The agreement subject to the change based on the mandated 5-year process of the JMRL regional agreement. And then there was some language in here about the schedule, the annual schedule of the library. Since that's a board decision that happens every year, I just asked them to strike that language because it's no longer. It's not relevant basically to say every 3 years they have to go back and say, well, actually, like we added a holiday last year, the library board can do that without needing this agreement.
Thank you for explaining that. I just wanted to make sure we weren't robbing our staff of holidays.
No. Okay. So what we're doing is just removing that language here because that's a board decision. So I think what happened 3 years ago was that this board took a vote to authorize the board president to sign this document and to negotiate any small changes with the assumption that if something major happened, it would come back to the library board. Yeah, although, as I said, the price for this is already set. Any questions?
Okay, no questions on that. Sorry, I'm just going to try to move things along here to make up a little time. Oh, yes, sorry.
We have a motion to authorize the board president. Is somebody interested, the board president, to sign this?
I move that we authorize the board president to sign this document.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I will sign that before I leave today.
Well, it's not complete yet. The city has to.
Tony, you will sign that. When we get there.
Appreciate you.
Okay, moving on then to old business. We have a flurry of votes here. I'll let David just kind of walk us through, but this is all from agenda last month.
So all the documentation on the fiscal year 23 JMRL budget was shared with you all last week, has been publicly available since October of last year. We did append the equipment budget, which was shared with you all last month and which was recommended by the Budget and Finance Committee. So the reason we wait until June to do this, even though we've already known what the budget is since earlier in the year, is we're waiting for each jurisdiction to finalize their budgets, and the last one has done so. So now that all the JMRL member jurisdictions finalize their budgets, JMRL can finalize their budget. So it requires a vote to approve the fiscal year 20 budget unless there are any questions about said budget. JJ stayed for.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions on any part? Any questions? If not, do I hear a motion to approve the fiscal year 23 JMRL budget? Yeah, sorry.
You've been here all this time. We should go on to the question. How about thank you?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It was so well done. We don't have
Yes.
Yeah.
That we approved the 23 budget.
Thank you very much, Kathy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion will carry. Updates to the, yes, thank you. I don't think it was anything with no pop or circumstance. David, the updated JMRL 5-year.
Yes, so the entire budget and the entire 5-year plan are included in the handouts that were posted online for you all. So the only, and Lisa shared the 5-year plan with the board last month. As a reminder, the changes were to the technology goal, which replaced the kind of staff-led plan with some board level goals. And the second change was to add some wording about collecting data on fines, because currently we had a goal in there to make a review of fines, and the data that AJ is getting in is not going to help us do that. So you need to change some things. And the last one was to change the date on a central library work group formation to 23. So those are the three changes. We just need to approve, the board needs to approve the changes to the 5-year plan.
Any last questions, concerns, or comments about those changes that Lisa presented on last month? Hearing none, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the updated 5-year plan?
I'd like to move that we approve the updated 5-year plan.
Thank you very
Alita
much.
Childs.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion will carry. Fiscal year 23 board meeting and budget schedule. David, back to you.
Also included in your handouts for your review. The only change was the correction to the date at Christmas. When we shared it for you last week, the date of the board meeting was the date that the library was going to be closed for Christmas. So that got moved to, I believe, the week before in your, oh Lord, I gotta scroll through the whole.
I think that's right. I believe that's
First, he takes away all their holidays.
So the board, this is for the board meeting. The library board meeting got changed to December 19th. So that's the only change from what you reviewed last month.
Sounds reasonable.
That just also needs a vote.
Any last minute questions, concerns, comments? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve the fiscal year 23 board meeting and budget schedule?
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you. Give it to Lisa. All in favor?
Aye.
Is that all? Okay. The motion will carry. Thank you very much. And our last item of old business, fiscal year 23 library board officers. David.
The proposal that the nominating committee made last month was for Tony Townsend as president and Alita Childs as vice president. I believe the board's bylaws say they will also accept any nominations from the floor at this point before a vote.
Anyone like to make any last nominations before we vote? Hearing none. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the fiscal year 23 library board officers?
I would. I so move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Wonderful. The motion carries. Congratulations, Tony and Alita. Look forward to working with you and supporting you technically and emotionally, as I have been supported by all of you in this way. Thank you very much. Moving along, library director's report. David, we'll stay with you.
I'd like to echo that thanks to both Thomas and Wendy for their service to the library board.
Thank you, Wendy, very much.
Wendy, it has been several years.
Yes.
Okay, quickly, I wanted to report on a few things. The state had additional funding from the ARPA Act available towards the end of this fiscal year. It was eligible for areas with the state's definition of low health outcomes. The only JMRL jurisdiction that qualified there was Louisa. So Ophelia Payne and her staff and I reviewed, and we are going to be ordering a privacy pod for Louisa, which looks like an old phone booth, basically. Looks like a Doctor Who, type thing. And it is soundproof, modular. It has power and light. It's intended for individuals to use to make calls like job interviews, telehealth calls, things like that. And Louisa has the room to be able to put it on next to a power outlet or whatnot, so individuals can book it and they can use it without disturbing the folks around. So excited by that. I'll be ordering wanted to report on a change to the city's defined contribution retirement plan, which I have mentioned to the Budget and Finance Committee, but it has been finalized by the city of Charlottesville. This is the retirement plan that most JMRL staff are on. This change is going to, so currently all new employees are enrolled in this plan. The library pays 8% of an employee's salary into a 401 plan. With this change, after 5 years of service, that amount will bump up to a 9% contribution. After 10 years of service, it will go up to a 10% contribution. So it's a retention tool to further incentivize staying with the organization. Now, there are funds available in forfeiture funds that JMRL has paid over the years into this retirement plan to pay for it next year. So there's no additional budgetary impact for fiscal year 23. There will be a budgetary impact for fiscal year 24, which will just be part of your normal budgeting process. AJ and I will bring it to you with those already built in. I'm pleased to announce that Nandi Hogue is the JMRL NAACP scholarship winner. Thanks again to Alita for her help on that. Alita, Nandi starts tomorrow at the Gordon Avenue Library.
Okay.
So if you'd like to see her, she'll be at Gordon Avenue for the first few weeks while she learns the ropes of using the library system, and then she's going to move around and visit the rest of the branches. I sent this around, but it is official that the state budget has been approved by the governor, so it is a done deal finally, and that includes a $2.5 million increase in state aid for public libraries statewide. Not for JMRL, statewide. But JMRL gets the second largest amount in the state. So when we were talking about regional reasons to get together, that's one of them. And that's entirely used for books and materials selection. So JMRL's materials budget comes from the state. The total increase for next year for JMRL is over $100,000 though out of that. So it's a huge increase, bringing the total amount that JMRL received in state aid to $856,240. So that's significant. And it will help ease some of the pressures on the collections, but it's still under 75% of what full funding should be for state aid. So Tony will remember working on this when the number was closer to 50%. So we're closer to 75 now, and progress is being made. It's just very slow, and I will keep working with the legislative committee of the Virginia Library Association on that. I hesitate to report this or not, but Gordon Avenue has had a fun family program with a family of skunks under the brick staircase. The librarians found a mother skunk and their kits, they're called, and they're very cute, but don't get too close to them. So they put up informational signs about the kits and had the Wildlife Center take them when their mother abandoned them. The mother left. They're nomadic apparently, so the Wildlife Center said, just give them a few days and they'll leave. The mother left, the kits stayed. Special shout out to the Gordon Avenue staff who actually trapped and transported some of these skunks.
Wow.
Like I said, hesitated to
Above and beyond.
yes. Just a few quick things. JMRL is working with City IT for online payroll services, which is not something that we've been able to offer. There have been paper copies of pay stubs for the 20 years that I've been at JMRL. So City IT is working on a solution for us. The salary study for JMRL staff has begun. It is very intensive right now. All staff are asked to fill out a very long form about what their current job responsibilities are and what their title is, and just basic information about their positions. And then the city and the consultants they're working with will come up with some basic competencies and a new salary suggestions for the salary study. We're expecting that in October, November of next year. So it's probably not going to make our budget going into fiscal year 24, depending on timing. But it'll be something to strive for and to work with our jurisdictional partners to get funded over the next few years. And last but not least, I will be away all next week, very rarely actually away. So if you need me, get me this week, and otherwise I'll get back to you when I'm back the second week in July.
Enjoy a well-deserved vacation.
That's fine.
That's all I have to report. It's family, so.
Yay.
Don't
Don't call her.
Nobody call him.
Oh, I just got a message from the city of Charlottesville that now they're expecting the comp study in December and January. So it's going to be pushed past our budgeting process.
Helpful. Okay. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Thank you very much for the report, David. Do we have any other matters that were not on the agenda today that anyone would like to bring up before us?
Doesn't matter, but I would have done this at the beginning, but Mr. Willie Gentry, who's on our Board of Supervisors, is here, and I didn't acknowledge him or say thank you.
I'm a little surprised that you talk about Lewis County, you talk about the Board of Supervisors, and I'm here to get input, obviously, and nobody asked my opinion, so.
Well, you could have jumped up.
Well,
Really, you're not shy.
I don't want to be controversial. Basically, I'm sitting here listening to all the comments of both sides, and like Lisa said earlier, there's two sides of this thing, and our Board of Supervisors kind of weighed them out too, and we passed a resolution that not to change. And I'm sitting here again trying to convince myself, well, did I hear any good reasons to change? a resolution. And to be honest with you, I did.
Thank you very much. If there are no other matters, future agenda items, we're going to move this conversation from the name change from new business to old business. But I did not come across much in our conversation today, other than that felt like it needed to be put on agenda. So, David, correct me if I'm mistaken.
There should be a policy committee meeting. We
Okay.
rescheduled the policy committee meeting today in order
Of course.
to make time for public comment. So,
Okay, so we'll have a report from our policy committee at next month's meeting.
and we're also overdue for a technology
Technology.
committee meeting, so maybe
Yeah.
we'll schedule that before the next board meeting. So that would be the July board meeting. Potentially a report from the technology.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, wait, so, okay, let me get.
According to
that on my
July.
We're gonna meet technology before the
25th.
July.
July 25th is our next.
Potentially, I'll talk to you about that.
Yeah, we can do that. Like,
Okay. Well, if there is no other business to come before us today, thank you all very much. This has been a wonderful year, and I will bang the gavel here for the last time. And we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank